My name is Karen, and I'm 32 years old. For as long as I can remember, I've lived in my older sister's shadow. Beverly has always been the golden child, beautiful, successful, married to the perfect man. Meanwhile, I was just the quiet librarian who took care of our sick mother. But what happened at that jewelry store last month changed everything. I thought I was going there to pick out an engagement ring with my sister's help. Instead, I got the shock of my life when a billionaire walked in and called me his wife. Before we dive into this incredible story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Please hit that like button and subscribe for more amazing true stories. Trust me, you won't believe what happens next. Growing up with Beverly was like living next to the sun. She was so bright that everyone else just disappeared. She's 3 years older than me, and from the moment she could walk, she was destined for greatness. Homecoming queen in high school, valedictorian of her graduating class, and she married Harold, a successful corporate lawyer, when she was just 24. Their wedding was this massive affair with 300 guests featured in the local society pages. I took a completely different path. While Beverly was conquering the world, I was the quiet one who preferred books to parties. I worked as a library assistant at our local branch, helping elderly patrons find romance novels and teaching kids how to use the computer. When our mother got sick with cancer 5 years ago, I was the one who moved back home to take care of her. Beverly visited on holidays and sent flowers, but I was there for the daily struggles, the chemotherapy appointments, the sleepless nights, the gradual decline that broke my heart. Our parents always compared us, and I never measured up. "Why can't you be more like Beverly?" became the soundtrack of my childhood. Beverly would have handled this better. Beverly never caused problems like this. It didn't matter that I got good grades or that I volunteered at the animal shelter every weekend. Beverly was the star, and I was just the supporting character in her story. The Shadow nickname started when Beverly was a senior and I was a freshman. She claimed I copied everything she did, her hairstyle, her clothes, even her choice of electives. "There goes my little shadow," she'd say, whenever I showed up somewhere she was. The family thought it was cute and endearing, so the name stuck. By the time I graduated, even our parents called me Shadow more often than Karen. I started to believe that maybe I really didn't have an identity of my own. When our mother passed away 2 years ago, I thought Beverly and I might grow closer. Instead, the opposite happened. Dad remarried his secretary Agnes just 6 months later, and I felt more alone than ever. Beverly threw herself into her social life, joining country clubs and charity boards, while I struggled to figure out what to do with my life now that I wasn't a caregiver anymore. That's when I met Thomas at a community college art class I'd enrolled in to try something new. He was taking accounting courses to advance his career, but he'd signed up for pottery as a creative outlet. Thomas was kind and patient, with gentle hands that could shape clay into beautiful bowls, and a smile that made me feel seen for the first time in years. We started dating slowly, carefully, both of us cautious about love after our own struggles. When Thomas proposed 8 months later, it was nothing like Beverly's elaborate engagement story. He took me to the botanical garden where we'd had our first real conversation, got down on one knee by the rose bushes, and offered me his grandmother's promise ring. It wasn't expensive, just a simple band with a tiny diamond, but it represented something real and honest. Beverly's reaction when I called to tell her was predictably dismissive. "Well, it's about time someone settled for you," she said, with that laugh that always made me feel small. Thomas had promised we'd go to a real jewelry store to pick out something special for our wedding day. He'd been saving up for months, setting aside money from his accounting job for what he called the ring my beautiful fiancé deserves. But when Beverly heard about our plans, she immediately inserted herself into the situation. "Oh, honey, you can't just walk into any old jewelry store," she said during one of her rare phone calls. "You need someone with connections, someone who knows quality. I'll take you to Cartwell Jewelers downtown, Harold's family has been shopping there for generations. They'll give you a decent discount if I'm there." I should have said no. I should have insisted that Thomas and I handle it ourselves, but there was still that little girl inside me who desperately wanted her big sister's approval, who thought maybe this could be a bonding experience. Thomas was working that Saturday and couldn't come along, so I agreed to meet Beverly at the store. Cartwright Jewelers was exactly the kind of place that made me nervous. All marble floors and crystal chandeliers with jewelry displays that probably cost more than I made in a year. But Beverly had insisted this was where we needed to go, and I trusted her judgment about these things. After all, she was the one with the successful husband and the perfect life. Surely she knew what she was talking about. Walking into Cartwright Jewelers felt like entering a cathedral dedicated to wealth and status. The marble floors gleamed under crystal chandeliers that cast rainbow prisms across glass display cases filled with diamonds that could blind you. Everything whispered expensive, from the thick carpeting in the seating area to the classical music playing softly overhead. I felt completely out of place in my simple blue dress and cardigan, clutching my small purse like a shield. Beverly arrived 15 minutes after me, making an entrance in her designer heels and tailored jacket. She looked like she belonged here, moving through the space with the confidence of someone who'd never been told she couldn't afford something. The contrast between us was immediate and obvious. She was the customer they wanted, and I was just along for the ride. Geraldine, the store manager, greeted us with professional warmth. She was an elegant woman in her 50s, with silver hair pulled back in a perfect chignon and a smile that reached her eyes. "Good afternoon, ladies. How may I assist you today?" Beverly immediately took charge, extending her hand with authority. "I'm Beverly Patterson. My husband, Harold Patterson. You might know the Patterson family. They've been clients here for 30 years. She gestured toward me dismissively. "This is my little sister. She's getting married and needs guidance selecting appropriate jewelry." I felt myself shrinking into the background as Beverly continued talking, name-dropping Harold's family connections and mentioning their recent purchase of anniversary earrings. Geraldine nodded politely, but I could see her trying to include me in the conversation. Every time she looked my way, though, Beverly would redirect attention back to herself. The first display case Beverly led us to contained engagement sets that made my eyes water, not from beauty, but from the price tags. $20,000, $35,000, $50,000 for rings that sparkled like captured starlight. I thought of Thomas carefully saving $200 a month and felt my stomach drop. "Now this is what real quality looks like," Beverly announced, pointing to a 3-carat solitaire that cost more than my annual salary. "See how the light catches it? This is what you should be aiming for, Shadow." There it was. The nickname that made me feel invisible, spoken loud enough for other customers to hear. An older couple browsing nearby looked over with curious expressions. I felt heat creeping up my neck as Beverly continued her lecture on diamond quality and proper settings. "Of course she'll need something within her budget," Beverly said to Geraldine with a knowing look. "Library assistant salary, you understand, but we want her to learn what good jewelry looks like, even if she can't afford it." Geraldine's expression grew uncomfortable. "Perhaps we could look at some lovely options in different price ranges," she suggested diplomatically. "We have beautiful pieces that would suit any budget." Beverly waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, we'll get to those eventually. But first, Shadow needs an education. She's never owned anything nicer than costume jewelry." "Have you, Shadow?" The way she said my nickname made it sound like an insult. Other customers were definitely staring now, and I wanted to disappear into the marble floor. This wasn't the sisterly bonding experience I'd hoped for. It was turning into another performance of Beverly's superiority with me as the hapless understudy. I tried to speak up to mention that Thomas and I had discussed our budget and knew what we could afford. But Beverly talked over me. She's always been the practical one in the family, she told Geraldine. Never understood the finer things. I keep telling her she needs to expand her horizons. The humiliation was building layer by layer, each comment another weight on my shoulders. I found myself apologizing for existing, for having a smaller budget, for taking up Geraldine's time. It was exactly like being a teenager again, standing in Beverly's shadow while she shone. But something felt different this time. Maybe it was Thomas's love giving me strength. Or maybe I was just tired of being invisible. When Beverly suggested I try on the $50,000 ring just to see what real quality feels like on your finger, I finally found my voice. I'd rather look at something in our actual price range, I said quietly but firmly. Thomas and I know what we can afford, and we want something meaningful, not just expensive. Beverly's perfectly plucked eyebrows rose in surprise. She wasn't used to me pushing back, even in the smallest way. The moment stretched between us, and I could feel the shift in the store's atmosphere. Geraldine looked relieved that I'd finally spoken up, but Beverly's expression was darkening. This was when I should have known to be careful. Beverly had never liked being contradicted, especially not in public. But I was too focused on finally standing up for myself to recognize the warning signs. I had no idea that her anger was about to explode in a way that would change everything. Beverly's face shifted through several expressions before settling on cold fury. She wasn't used to anyone, especially her little sister Shadow, contradicting her in public. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable. Her smile became fixed and dangerous, her eyes hardened, and her voice took on that particular tone I remembered from childhood arguments. "Oh, how sweet," she said, loud enough for the entire front section of the store to hear. "Shadow thinks she knows about jewelry now. Let me tell everyone here about my little sister's expertise in fine things." What happened next was like watching a masterclass in public humiliation. Beverly turned to the other customers and Geraldine, as if she were hosting a social gathering rather than destroying someone's dignity. "You see, Shadow here has always been the follower in our family," she announced, gesturing toward me like I was an exhibit. "She copies everything I do, always has, since we were children. I pick a hairstyle, she gets the same cut 6 months later. I choose a career path, she finds something similar but smaller. Now I have a beautiful marriage, and suddenly she's engaged too." The older couple who'd been watching us exchanged uncomfortable glances. A younger woman trying on earrings had stopped to stare. Even the security guard by the door was paying attention. I felt exposed under all those eyes, like I was standing naked in the middle of the store. Beverly wasn't finished. She pulled out her phone and started showing Geraldine photos of her own wedding ring, a massive emerald-cut diamond surrounded by smaller stones. "This is what Harold chose for me. 3 carats, flawless clarity custom setting. This is what happens when a man truly values his woman." Then she turned the phone toward me, holding it up like evidence in a trial. "Now, Shadow, show everyone what your Thomas got you." I looked down at the simple promise ring on my finger, Thomas's grandmother's ring, with its tiny diamond and worn gold band. In the harsh lighting of the jewelry store, surrounded by displays worth more than cars, it looked exactly like what it was, an old ring from someone who couldn't afford better. "Go ahead," Beverly pressed. "Show them your engagement ring." My face burned as I held up my hand. The difference was stark and obvious. Several customers looked away, embarrassed for me. One woman shook her head sympathetically. The humiliation was complete and public. "You see," Beverly said, as if she'd proven some important point. "This is what happens when you don't wait for the right man, when you settle for someone who shops at pawn stores instead of proper jewelers. Thomas is a sweet boy, I'm sure, but he's not exactly Harold material, is he?" Geraldine finally tried to intervene. "Perhaps we could focus on finding something beautiful within your budget," she said gently. "Love is what makes a ring special, not the price tag." Beverly laughed, that sharp, cutting laugh I'd heard my entire life. Oh, how romantic. Yes, let's pretend that love pays the bills and buys houses and sends children to good schools. Shadow has always been such a dreamer. I felt tears starting to burn behind my eyes, but I forced myself not to cry. Not here, not in front of all these strangers, not while Beverly was performing her superiority for an audience. I thought about Thomas, about how his face lit up when he talked about our future together, about how he held my hand during my mother's funeral and never made me feel like I was too much or too little. Thomas loves me, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. He doesn't need to prove it with expensive rings. The words hung in the air between us. It was such a small rebellion, just stating a simple truth. But Beverly's reaction made it clear I'd crossed a line. Her mouth opened slightly in shock before snapping shut. Her cheeks flushed red above her perfectly applied makeup. "How dare you?" she said quietly, stepping closer to me. "After everything I've done for you, all the guidance I've tried to give you, you stand there and lecture me about love." The store had gone completely quiet now. Even the classical music seemed muted. Other customers had stopped pretending not to watch. Geraldine looked genuinely worried, and I saw her make a subtle gesture toward the security guard. Beverly grabbed my wrist, suddenly, her manicured nails digging into my skin. "You ungrateful little shadow!" she hissed. "Do you think Thomas would even look at you if you weren't so pathetically grateful for any attention? Do you think anyone would choose you over me if they had a real choice?" I tried to pull my hand away, but her grip tightened. The expensive ring display case was right next to us, filled with delicate jewelry that probably cost more than I'd make in 5 years. As I struggled to free myself, my elbow knocked against the case, and several ring boxes tumbled to the floor. The sound of jewelry hitting marble echoed through the store like gunshots. Expensive rings scattered across the floor, and one of the boxes opened, sending a diamond tennis bracelet sliding under a nearby display case. "Now look what you've done!" Beverly snarled, her voice rising to a level that made other customers step back. "This is exactly why you can't have nice things, Shadow. You destroy everything you touch." Geraldine rushed over to help gather the scattered jewelry, her professional composure cracking. "It's all right," she said, though her voice was strained. "Accidents happen." But Beverly wasn't interested in accidents or understanding. Her fury had found its target, and she was done pretending to be the caring older sister. Everything she'd been holding back, every bit of resentment and superiority, was about to come pouring out in the most devastating way possible. The security guard was walking toward us now, and I could see other customers backing away. The stage was set for something terrible, and I was trapped in the spotlight with nowhere to run. What happened next felt like it occurred in slow motion, even though it was over in seconds. Beverly's face contorted with rage as she looked at the scattered jewelry, then at me standing there with my hand pressed to my mouth in horror. The store had gone completely silent, except for the soft classical music that now seemed absurdly cheerful. "You worthless shadow!" Beverly screamed, and her hand came across my face with a crack that echoed through the marble space. The slap was harder than any she'd ever given me as a child. My head snapped to the side, and I stumbled backward, my hand flying to my burning cheek. The pain was immediate and shocking, but the humiliation was worse. Everyone in the store had seen it, customers, staff, the security guard who was now moving quickly toward us. "You'll always be nothing but my shadow," Beverly continued, her voice shrill and carrying throughout the store. "A pathetic little copycat who ruins everything she touches. Look at this mess. Look what you've done." I stood there with my hand pressed to my stinging cheek, tears finally spilling over. The entire store was staring at us. A well-dressed older man near the watch display, a young couple who'd been looking at wedding bands, several other customers who'd stopped their shopping to witness this spectacle. Their faces showed everything from shock to disgust to pity. Geraldine rushed forward, her professional mask completely gone now. "Mum, I'm going to have to ask you to stop this immediately," she said firmly. "This behaviour is completely unacceptable." But Beverly was beyond reason now. She grabbed for my purse, trying to pull it off my shoulder. "You're going to pay for the damage," she snarled. "Every penny. I don't care if you have to use every credit card you have. This is what happens when shadows try to be real people." The security guard reached us, then a tall man in his 40s, who looked like he'd seen everything, but was still shocked by what was happening. "Ladies, I need you both to calm down right now," he said in a voice that was professional but firm. Beverly whirled on him. "Don't you dare tell me to calm down. Do you know who I am? My husband's family has been shopping here for 30 years. This little shadow destroyed thousands of dollars worth of merchandise, and she's going to pay for it." I was still standing there in shock, touching my burning cheek and trying to process what had just happened. My older sister, the woman I'd looked up to my entire life despite everything, had just slapped me in public like I was a misbehaving child. The humiliation was complete and total. "I'm so sorry," I whispered, looking at Geraldine and the scattered jewellery. "I'm so sorry about the mess. I didn't mean to." "Don't you dare apologise," Beverly snapped, raising her hand again. "You should be sorry. You should be—" That's when the door chimed. The sound was soft and elegant, the same gentle tone that had announced our arrival an hour earlier. But something about this entrance was different. The click of expensive shoes on marble was measured and confident each step, announcing the arrival of someone important. Beverly was still mid-sentence, her hand raised and ready to strike me again, when Geraldine's entire demeanour changed. Her face went from stressed and worried to relieved and almost grateful. She straightened her shoulders and smoothed her hair, transforming back into the polished professional we'd first met. "Mr. Ashworth," she said, and there was something in her voice. Respect, certainly, but also genuine warmth. "Welcome back to Cartwell." I couldn't see who had entered because Beverly was still standing over me, blocking my view. But I heard the footsteps stop, and when the newcomer spoke, his voice cut through the tension in the store like a knife through silk. "What exactly is happening here?" The voice was calm but carried unmistakable authority. It was the kind of voice that was used to being obeyed, that didn't need to be raised to command attention. Every person in the store turned toward the sound, including Beverly. I finally looked up to see a man in his early 40s, tall and impeccably dressed in a charcoal grey suit that probably cost more than my car. His dark hair was perfectly styled and his eyes were sharp and intelligent as they took in the scene before him. But what struck me most was the way everyone in the store was looking at him, with the kind of deference usually reserved for celebrities or royalty. Geraldine stepped forward slightly. "Mr. Ashworth, I'm afraid we've had a bit of an incident. This lady," she gestured carefully toward Beverly, "became upset about some jewellery that was accidentally scattered and things escalated." The man's eyes moved from Geraldine to Beverly to the jewellery still scattered on the floor and finally to me. When his gaze reached my face, something changed in his expression. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly and his eyes focused on my reddened cheek with an intensity that made the air in the store feel charged. Beverly, meanwhile, had undergone her own transformation. The screaming harridan from moments before had vanished, replaced by the charming socialite she presented to the world. She stepped back from me and smoothed her hair, flashing her most dazzling smile. "I'm so sorry you had to witness this family disagreement," she said in her sweetest voice. "Sometimes you have to discipline younger siblings, you know how it is. I'm Beverly Patterson. My husband Harold's family has been shopping here for decades." The man didn't respond to her introduction. Instead, he stepped closer to me, and I found myself looking up into eyes that seemed familiar somehow, though I couldn't place where I might have seen them before. "Are you hurt?" he asked quietly, and his voice was gentler now, concerned. I shook my head, still too shocked to speak properly. My cheek was still burning from Beverly's slap, and I was acutely aware that this wealthy stranger was seeing me at my most vulnerable moment. Beverly laughed nervously. "Oh, she's fine. Sisters, you know, sometimes Shadow needs a reality check." That's when everything changed. The man's expression hardened as he looked at Beverly, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a dangerous edge that made everyone in the store go completely still. "Did you just call her Shadow?" The temperature in the store seemed to drop 10 degrees. The man's voice had gone from concerned to deadly calm, and Beverly's confident smile faltered as she realized she'd said something wrong. "Well, yes," she stammered. "That's what we've always called her. It's just a family nickname. She's always been my little shadow, following me around, copying everything I do. It's harmless, really." The man stepped closer to me, and I noticed that his hands were shaking slightly with controlled anger. He reached toward my face, stopping just short of touching my reddened cheek. "May I?" he asked softly. I nodded, still too confused and overwhelmed to understand what was happening. His fingers were gentle as they traced the edge of where Beverly's hand had struck me, and his touch was strangely comforting. "Your sister did this to you?" he asked, his voice still quiet but carrying an undercurrent of fury that made Beverly take a step backward. "It's not a big deal," I whispered automatically, falling back into old patterns of minimizing Beverly's behavior. "She was just upset about the jewelry. I made a mess and she—" "Darling!" he interrupted gently, and the endearment made Beverly's eyes widen in confusion. "You don't need to make excuses for someone who hurt you." Beverly's laugh was high and nervous now. "Darling, I'm sorry. Do you two know each other? Because that's impossible. Shadow doesn't know people like you. She's a librarian who lives in a tiny apartment and shops at thrift stores." The man turned to look at Beverly, and his expression was so cold it could have frozen water. "Your sister," he said with precise enunciation, "is my wife." The words hung in the air like a bomb that had just exploded. Beverly's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, and then a dawning horror as she began to process what she'd just heard. "That's impossible," she said weakly. "Shadow isn't married. She's engaged to Thomas, some accountant she met at community college. She can't be married to—" She trailed off as she really looked at the man for the first time, taking in his expensive suit, his confident bearing, the way everyone in the store was watching him with obvious respect. "What's your name?" she asked, in a voice that had gone very small. "Leonard Ashworth," he replied, never taking his eyes off Beverly's face. I watched Beverly's face go pale as recognition hit her. Even I knew that name, Ashworth Industries, one of the largest private companies in the state. Leonard Ashworth was on the cover of business magazines, a billionaire who owned everything from real estate to tech companies. The Ashworth family had been wealthy for generations, and Leonard had multiplied that fortune many times over. "No," Beverly said, shaking her head. "No, that's not possible. Shadow could never—" "She wouldn't. How could she possibly—" "We've been married for 6 months," Leonard said calmly. "We had a private ceremony at my estate in the mountains. Small gathering, just close friends and family." Beverly's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. 6 months, but you never said. You never told me you were seeing anyone, let alone married to." She gestured helplessly at Leonard, clearly unable to process that her supposedly inferior little sister could be married to one of the wealthiest men in the state. The other customers in the store were watching this revelation with fascination. The older couple had moved closer, not even pretending they weren't listening. The young woman who'd been trying on earrings had her phone out, probably recording. The security guard looked like he wished he was anywhere else. Geraldine stepped forward with professional grace. "Mrs. Ashworth," she said warmly, addressing me directly for the first time. "I had no idea you were shopping with us today. If you'd mentioned who you were when you arrived, we could have provided our VIP service." "Mrs. Ashworth, I was Mrs. Ashworth." Even hearing it said out loud felt surreal, like someone was talking about a different person entirely. Beverly was staring at me like she'd never seen me before. Mrs. Ashworth, she repeated numbly. Shadow is Mrs. Ashworth. Leonard's expression grew even more dangerous. Her name, he said with quiet intensity, is Karen, and if you ever call her Shadow again or lay another hand on her, you'll discover exactly what the Ashworth family does to people who threaten what we love. The threat was delivered so calmly it was terrifying. Beverly actually stumbled backward, bumping into a display case. For the first time in my life, I saw my older sister look truly afraid. I didn't know, she whispered. If I had known she was married to you, I never would have. I mean, it was just a family thing. She's always been Shadow to us. I didn't mean any disrespect. Leonard turned back to me, his expression softening immediately. Are you all right, sweetheart? Do you want to go home, or would you like to finish your shopping first? The gentleness in his voice, such a contrast to the cold fury he'd shown Beverly, finally broke through my shock. This was really happening. My husband, who I'd kept secret from my family to protect our relationship from exactly this kind of drama, had just witnessed my sister assault me in public. I think I'd like to go home, I said quietly. Leonard nodded and put his arm around me protectively. Geraldine, please have your security footage from today copied and sent to my attorney. I believe we'll want it for evidence. Evidence? Beverly squeaked. Evidence for what? Leonard looked at her with the expression someone might use for something unpleasant they'd found on their shoe. Assault charges, of course. You struck my wife in public, attempted to steal her purse, and caused a scene in a respectable establishment. Did you think there wouldn't be consequences? The colour drained completely from Beverly's face as the reality of her situation began to sink in. She wasn't dealing with her little sister Shadow anymore. She was facing a man with unlimited resources and the will to use them, and she'd just attacked the person he loved most in the world. Beverly's world was crumbling in real time, and I could see every moment of realization cross her face. The sister she'd called Shadow, her entire life, the one she'd dismissed as worthless and inferior, was married to Leonard Ashworth. Not only was I wealthy beyond anything Beverly had ever imagined, but I'd been wealthy for months while she'd been condescending to me about Thomas and his modest accountant's salary. Karen, she said, using my real name for the first time in years. Please, you have to understand, I had no idea you were married. If you had known, you would have treated me with basic human decency. Leonard interrupted, his voice cutting through her excuses like ice. How noble of you! Beverly flinched but pressed on desperation creeping into her voice. It's just family dynamics, you know how siblings are. We've always had this relationship where I'm the older sister who gives guidance. I was trying to help her understand quality jewelry. I never meant to actually hurt her. Leonard pulled out his phone, and I could see Beverly's panic increase as she watched him scroll through his contacts. Johnson, he said when someone answered. It's Leonard Ashworth. I need you to meet me at Cartwright Jewelers downtown. My wife has been assaulted and I want charges filed immediately. No, wait. Beverly stepped forward, her hands outstretched in supplication. Please, Mr. Ashworth, you don't understand our family. This is just how we are. Shadow, I mean Karen, she knows I don't mean anything by it. Right, Karen, tell him this is just sister stuff. All eyes turned to me, and for the first time in my life I held the power in our relationship. Beverly was looking at me with the same desperate expression I'd probably worn countless times when seeking her approval. The role reversal was complete and startling. I thought about all the years of being called Shadow, of being dismissed and diminished, of apologizing for taking up space in my own life. I thought about Thomas saving every penny to buy me a ring that would make me happy, while Beverly had just spent an hour mocking his efforts and our love. No, I said quietly. This isn't just sister stuff. This is you being cruel because you thought you could get away with it. Beverly's face went white. Karen, please, think about what you're doing. If this gets out, if there's a scandal, it'll destroy Harold's career. The Patterson name will be ruined. Is that really what you want? Leonard had finished his call and was watching this exchange with cold interest. Interesting, he said. Now she's worried about consequences. Where was that concern when she was hitting you? Other customers were definitely recording now, and I could see Beverly becoming aware of the phones pointed in her direction. Her social media perfect life was being documented in its worst moment, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Geraldine approached us carefully, holding a small bag. Mrs. Ashworth, she said, I took the liberty of selecting some pieces I thought you might like. No pressure, of course, but they're here if you'd like to see them. I realized she was trying to restore some normalcy to the situation, to treat me like the valued customer I apparently was, rather than the victim of a public assault. The bag probably contained jewelry worth more than Beverly's car offered to me, without question, because of who I'd married. That's very kind, I said, accepting the bag. Thank you for your discretion during all of this. Beverly watched this interaction with growing horror. She was seeing her little sister Shadow being treated with the respect and deference she'd always craved for herself, while she stood there facing criminal charges and social ruin. I'm sorry, she said suddenly loudly enough for everyone in the store to hear. I'm sorry I hit you, Karen. I'm sorry I called you names. I was wrong, and I know that now. Leonard studied her like a scientist examining an interesting specimen. You're sorry you got caught, he corrected. You're sorry there are consequences. If I hadn't walked in when I did, you would have hit her again. It was true, and we all knew it. Beverly had been raising her hand for another slap when Leonard arrived. Her apology was damage control, not genuine remorse. What do you want from me? Beverly asked, and there was real fear in her voice now. What will it take to make this go away? Leonard looked at me. It's not my decision, he said. Karen gets to choose how this ends. The power dynamic had shifted so completely that I felt dizzy. Beverly, who had controlled every interaction we'd ever had, was now at my mercy. The sister who had made me feel invisible was begging for my forgiveness in front of a room full of strangers. Harold chose that moment to arrive. Beverly must have texted him during the chaos, because he came through the door looking harried and confused. He was a tall, thin man in his late 30s, impeccably dressed, but with the soft look of someone who'd never faced real adversity. Beverly, he called out, scanning the store. What's the emergency? Your text said something about needing a lawyer immediately. When he spotted us, his confusion deepened. He saw Beverly looking disheveled and panicked me with a red mark on my cheek and Leonard standing protectively beside me like a guard dog. Harold, Beverly rushed to him. Thank God you're here. We need damage control, and we need it now. Harold looked around the store, taking in the scattered jewelry, the watching customers, the obvious tension. What exactly happened here? Beverly grabbed his arm. I may have had a small disagreement with Karen and it got a little heated and now there might be assault charges and you need to fix this. Harold's lawyer instincts kicked in immediately. He started to ask Beverly for details, but then his gaze fell on Leonard and his expression changed completely. Leonard Ashworth, he said slowly, recognition dawning. Oh God. Beverly, what did you do? The fact that Harold recognized Leonard just made everything worse for Beverly. Her husband, the successful lawyer she'd always held up as superior to my Thomas, was looking at her with horror and embarrassment. She didn't know Karen was my wife, Leonard said calmly. She thought she was just attacking a librarian with no resources to fight back. Harold closed his eyes like he was in physical pain. Beverly, he said quietly, please tell me you didn't assault Leonard Ashworth's wife. The way he said it made it clear that Harold was more concerned about the social and legal implications than the fact that his wife had hurt someone. It was exactly the kind of calculating response that made me grateful I'd married Thomas instead of someone like him. Beverly was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks in black streaks. "I didn't know," she kept repeating. "If I had known who she was, I never would have touched her." "But you would have been fine hurting her if she was nobody important," Leonard observed. "How reassuring." The situation was spiraling beyond Beverly's control, and everyone could see it. Her perfect life built on image and status was cracking apart in the most public way possible. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one cleaning up her mess or apologizing for existing. I was the one holding all the cards. Standing in that jewelry store, watching my sister's carefully constructed world fall apart, I felt something I'd never experienced before: complete control over my own narrative. For 32 years, Beverly had been the author of our family story, casting herself as the golden child and me as the inadequate shadow. Now, suddenly, I was holding the pen. Harold was staring at his wife like he'd never seen her before. "Beverly, I need you to be very clear with me. Did you, or did you not, physically strike Mrs. Ashworth?" The formal way he addressed me wasn't lost on anyone. Harold was already distancing himself from Beverly's actions, thinking like a lawyer about liability and damage control. Beverly noticed it too, and I saw panic flash across her face as she realized even her husband was treating her like a legal problem rather than offering unconditional support. "It was barely a slap," she said weakly, "just a little tap to get her attention." She was being hysterical about the jewelry, and I was trying to calm her down. Several customers made sounds of disbelief. The crack of Beverly's hand across my face had echoed through the store like a gunshot, and everyone had heard it. Her attempt to minimize what happened was only making her look worse. Leonard's attorney arrived then, a sharp-looking woman in her 50s, who moved through the store with the same confident authority as Leonard himself. She introduced herself as Margaret Chen, and her presence immediately elevated the tension to a new level. This wasn't just a family dispute anymore, it was a legal matter with serious implications. "Mrs. Ashworth," Margaret said, addressing me directly, "I need to document your injuries and get your statement about what happened. Are you comfortable proceeding here, or would you prefer to go somewhere more private?" Beverly made a desperate sound. "Injuries. It was one slap, Karen. Tell them you're fine. Tell them it didn't hurt." But I wasn't fine, and it had hurt. My cheek was still burning, and more than that, my heart was broken. The sister I'd looked up to my entire life had hit me in public because she thought I was worthless enough to abuse without consequences. "I'd like to give my statement," I said clearly, "and I want photographs of my cheek before the redness fades." Beverly actually staggered backward like I'd struck her. Harold put his hand over his face, obviously calculating the legal and social ramifications of what was unfolding. Margaret nodded efficiently. "Geraldine, do you have security footage of the incident?" "Everything is recorded," Geraldine confirmed. "Multiple angles, high definition. We've already copied the relevant portions for Mr. Ashworth." "Multiple felonies on high-definition video," Margaret mused, making notes on her tablet. "Assault, attempted theft when she grabbed for the purse, destruction of property, with the scattered jewelry creating a public disturbance. This is quite comprehensive." Each charge Margaret listed made Beverly's face lose more colour. Harold was having what appeared to be a panic attack, loosening his tie and breathing heavily. "What about a plea agreement?" Harold asked desperately. "What would Mrs. Ashworth need to see to avoid prosecution?" Leonard looked at me. "It's entirely Karen's decision," he said. "Whatever she wants to do, I'll support completely." The power was intoxicating and terrifying. I'd never been in a position to demand justice for myself, never had resources or support to fight back against Beverly's bullying. Now I could destroy her life with a word, and we all knew it. "I want a public apology," I said slowly, thinking it through. A real one, not damage control. Filmed, posted on social media, acknowledging exactly what you did and why it was wrong. Beverly nodded eagerly. Yes, of course, I can do that right now. I'm not finished, I continued. I want you to attend anger management counseling for a year with proof of completion and family therapy because this dynamic between us is toxic and it ends now. Harold looked relieved. Those were reasonable demands, things they could manage without destroying Beverly's reputation completely. And I added, I want you to volunteer at a domestic violence shelter for 6 months. I want you to understand what it feels like to help people who've been hurt by someone who was supposed to love them. That one hit home. Beverly's face crumpled as the parallel became clear. She had hurt someone who was supposed to be able to trust her, someone she was supposed to protect. If you complete all of that, I said, I won't press criminal charges. But Beverly, if you ever call me Shadow again, if you ever raise your hand to me or anyone else in this family, if you ever treat someone as less than human because you think they can't fight back, I will use every resource available to me to make sure you face consequences. The threat was delivered in the same calm tone Leonard had used earlier, and it was just as effective. Beverly nodded frantically, tears streaming down her face. Margaret made more notes. I'll draft the agreement and have it ready for signatures by tomorrow. Mrs. Patterson, you'll have 30 days to begin the counselling and volunteer work with check-ins every month. Harold was already pulling out his phone, probably to call his own attorney to review whatever Margaret prepared. The legal machinery was in motion and there was no stopping it now. But as I watched Beverly's humiliation and Harold's panic, I didn't feel the satisfaction I'd expected. Instead, I felt sad and tired. This confrontation had been 32 years in the making, and it should have felt like a victory. Instead, it felt like the end of something that had never been healthy to begin with. Leonard seemed to sense my mood shift. Are you ready to go home? He asked gently. I nodded suddenly, exhausted by the entire ordeal. We'd come here for me to shop for jewellery, and instead we'd detonated my family like a bomb. There would be consequences and complications for months to come. Geraldine approached with the bag of jewellery she'd selected earlier. Mrs. Ashworth, these are yours with our compliments, she said, and please know that Cartwell Jewellers will always treat you with the respect you deserve. As we prepared to leave, Beverly made one last, desperate attempt to salvage something from the wreckage. Karen, she called out, we're still sisters, right? This doesn't change that. I paused at the door, Leonard's arm around my shoulders, and looked back at the woman who had shaped my childhood with her criticism and my adulthood with her dismissal. We're related, I said finally. Whether we're sisters depends on whether you learn to treat me like one. It wasn't forgiveness, but it wasn't complete condemnation either. It was something new, conditional acceptance based on changed behaviour. Beverly would have to earn a relationship with me from now on, rather than taking my presence and tolerance for granted. As we walked out of Cartwell Jewellers and toward Leonard's car, I felt lighter than I had in years. The shadow was finally stepping into her own light, and it was brighter than I'd ever imagined possible. 6 months later, I stood in the same jewellery store, but everything was different. I was different. The woman who had cowered under Beverly's verbal assault was gone, replaced by someone who knew her own worth and wouldn't accept less than she deserved. Geraldine greeted me with genuine warmth when I entered. Mrs. Ashworth, how wonderful to see you again. How may we help you today? I was shopping for anniversary gifts. Something to mark the 1-year milestone of my marriage to Leonard, though I also wanted to commemorate the 6 months since my life had truly begun. The scared, apologetic woman who had first walked through these doors felt like a stranger now. I'd like to see some pieces for my husband, I said confidently. Something special for our anniversary. As Geraldine led me to the men's section, I reflected on everything that had changed. Beverly had completed her anger management classes and was halfway through her volunteer commitment at the domestic violence shelter. The work had been harder than she'd expected, hearing stories from women who'd suffered far worse than one slap in a jewelry store. It was giving her perspective she'd never had before. Our family therapy sessions had been brutal but necessary. Beverly had to confront the fact that her treatment of me hadn't been loving guidance, but systematic emotional abuse designed to keep me small and manageable. I'd had to acknowledge my own role in enabling the dynamic by always apologizing and never setting boundaries. The public apology video Beverly posted had gone viral, not because people enjoyed her humiliation, but because so many viewers saw their own family dynamics reflected in our story. I'd received hundreds of messages from people who recognized themselves as the shadow in their own families, and many more from people who realized they might be the Beverly in someone else's life. Harold and Beverly's marriage had survived barely, but only after intensive couples counseling and Harold's commitment to supporting Beverly's genuine transformation, rather than just managing the legal fallout. They'd both learned uncomfortable truths about themselves and their relationship during the process. As for Thomas, he'd been incredibly understanding when I finally told him the full truth about my marriage to Leonard. The engagement had been real. I'd fallen in love with Leonard while still committed to Thomas, and the guilt had been eating me alive. Thomas deserved honesty, and he'd handled the revelation with more grace than I'd had any right to expect. He'd even wished me well and said he hoped Leonard appreciated how lucky he was. "This piece just arrived from Switzerland," Geraldine said, showing me an elegant watch with a sapphire face. "The craftsmanship is extraordinary." I examined the watch, thinking about Leonard and how he'd supported me through every difficult conversation and revelation of the past 6 months. He'd never pressured me to cut Beverly out of my life completely, but he'd also made it clear that he would never tolerate anyone treating me with disrespect again. Our marriage had grown stronger through the crisis. Leonard had seen me at my most vulnerable and loved me through it. I'd learned to accept that love without constantly questioning whether I deserved it. We'd both discovered that the quiet librarian he'd fallen in love with had tremendous strength underneath her gentle exterior. "It's perfect," I decided. "He'll love it." As Geraldine wrote up the purchase, I thought about the scholarship fund Leonard and I had established for first-generation college students. We'd named it the Karen Ashworth Foundation, and my real name on the paperwork still gave me a thrill. No more shadow, no more apologizing for existing. Just Karen, making a difference in the world. My phone buzzed with a text from Beverly. "Finished my shift at the shelter today. One of the women I've been working with got her GED. Thought you'd want to know. The change in Beverly hadn't been instant or easy. There had been setbacks and arguments, moments when she'd fallen back into old patterns before catching herself. But the woman who now volunteered at a domestic violence shelter and attended therapy twice a week was genuinely different from the one who'd slapped me in public." I texted back, "That's wonderful. You're doing important work." It wasn't the sisterly relationship either of us had imagined, but it was honest and respectful. We were building something new on the foundation of hard-won mutual understanding. Leonard picked me up outside the store just as he had 6 months ago, but this time I was walking out with my head high and a smile on my face. He kissed me gently and asked about my shopping trip. "Perfect," I told him. Everything went perfectly. As we drove home to our house in the hills, I reflected on the woman I'd become. The shadow was gone, not because someone had banished her, but because I'd finally stepped fully into my own light. I'd learned that being quiet didn't mean being weak, that kindness wasn't the same as being a doormat, and that love, real love, didn't require me to diminish myself to make others comfortable. The girl who'd grown up believing she was just Beverly's shadow had discovered she'd been the sun all along, bright enough to warm others without burning herself out, and that light would never be dimmed again. Have you ever felt like you were living in someone else's shadow? Maybe it was a sibling, a friend, or even a coworker who made you feel invisible or unimportant. I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Sometimes sharing these experiences helps us realize we're not alone. Please hit that like button if this story resonated with you, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories about finding your strength in difficult situations. Share this video with someone who might need to hear that they deserve to step into their own light. Thank you for watching, and remember, you are never just someone's shadow. You have your own unique brightness that the world needs to see. Take care, and I'll see you in the next story.